like herding cats. So let me just get up here and see how we do. This was called the Flats, and this is where there was a Native American family that lived here, the Tarabuchis, I think, but mostly a family of about 6 houses, and they were not painted, 2-story houses, and it was where the Finnish people lived. And you hardly ever saw them in the store. They just
had a
kind of separate life, culture. Yeah. And my
they
best
didn't finish their houses.
No, they didn't finish. And my friend Fred lived down here.
Was he finished?
He was not finished.
Hey, Whit, where are you? Because I'm trying to find Whit. Do you know where Whit is? Excuse me? I want to move back. Here, Whit, move your legs. Whit, move your legs. Oh, there you are.
You realize that when we walk down the streets of Cathlamette, they're going to think the population just increased by 50%.
Yeah.
So Carly and Lauren and Mary,
So
you're all in Girl Scouts, right?
I'm not in Girl Scout, but I go to Girl Scout camp.
So when I was a Girl Scout, Mrs. Austin was our Girl Scout leader, and she lived in this house right here. She had a great yard to play in.
To be working.
And she had a telephone. Our phones were really old-fashioned. She had a new-fashioned phone that had a black stem, and you hung the phone on the hook of the black stem, and you'd ring it like they did in the movies. And when I went to her house, I always called my parents so I could use her black phone. So I would ring the ringer, and the operator in the little office would say, "Number, please." And I said, "Get me 33M," because that's what they said in the movies. And the operator laughed. She knew who it was.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go up this way.
But what was yours like in your house?
In mine, it was a wooden box that hung on the wall, and it had a little slanted platform that came out, and the phone hung on a hook, and you would take the phone off the hook and then go ring, 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 ring with a crank. Look, this house was where the Heads lived. The Heads. My friend Binky lived here.
Binky?
Binky Head. His real name was Benson.
How about that house?
I don't know who lived there. Binky Head.
Still live here?
My friend Mary, who you've met,
Yeah.
her brother lives up on that hill.
Your friend.
Yes, this friend Mary too. There you go, honey. We are coming on to Columbia Street. Okay, here is that lumber store has been there for as long as I know. This is the Bradley house, and this was Lulu Heron and her daughter Bradley lived there. And
What did they do there? That was just their home?
that was their home. Their
That's a big
husband,
house.
well, they were married to lumber people.
Oh, timber family.
And over there, see the steeple over there? That was an Assembly of God church. And I got to stay in their house a few times because
Whose house?
the minister's house. And
What'd you do wrong?
I didn't do anything wrong, but they took care of me when my parents had to go out of town. They kind of liked me.
Smart. Put you on a master.
Hal didn't ever work there.
No.
Why is the
But when I was about 10 years old, I'll tell you about the lumber store. My dad, I needed something to keep me busy because they were at their store, which you were just coming to. And so I was probably Ella's age, or between Ella and Mary's age. My dad gave me a dollar, and I went down to the lumber store and bought $1 worth of lumber and nails and built myself a sled. No, wait a minute. I built a bookcase.
Wow.
Using the hammer and nails. And behind our store, which we're coming to, there was a big, huge old building that was not painted, an old house that had upstairs and downstairs. And my dad rented a room of that house, and that was kind of my play space in that old house.
Really?
Julia Butler Hanson was one of the first women congresswomen. She became a U.S. congresswoman, a strong Democrat. I remember one time Mon Walgren, who was the governor of the state of Washington, came and spoke in the courthouse steps right over here. And afterwards, I went to Goodfellow's drugstore across the street to get my ice cream treat, and she was in there talking to Mr. Goodfellow, and she said, she used very four-letter words. She told him, who was also a Democrat, what she thought of him, which it was in colorful terms. Right. I was in this house once to serve tea to the women's club when Gail and I were in high school. Right here, right here, at this very place, was the movie theater, the Elko movie theater. And now they tore it down, and then it turned into, when television came, movies didn't make it here.
When you were little,
No, didn't have TV until I was a junior in college.
And what
My dad didn't believe in TV.
what was the
But they were lots of times double features, and it didn't matter when you got into the movie. You could get in the middle of the movie, you didn't care, because you just stayed until it came around to where you got in. And I remember my first movies cost 7 cents, and popcorn was a nickel, and then they raised it to 15 cents, and popcorn was a dime.
Whoa.
Oh,
which what?
I remember when they put this sign up, I believe it was during our centennial. I can remember there was a big ceremony right out here in the middle of this area.
Daddy said that this was where your family's shop was.
Yes, this is where my father's and mother's store was. It's right
Not
here.
this one. That one.
Yep. And this was Mary's father right here. Oh, this is her grandfather. Yeah.
So whose office is this?
Now it's George's sons. This was our store, and these were the windows. My mom, they had a petition behind them, and my mom decorated them. Once every 2 weeks, she'd put up a new window display, and you'd walk in, and then there'd be counters. You'd walk in, and there'd be a long counter. And at first it was our candy counter, and then it turned into school supplies. Right over on this wall was stationery, books, children's toys, socks, clothes for children. On this side, I can tell you where everything was. On this side was women's, glassware, then thread and nylons, then men's clothing. And on each of these counters were women's beauty products, then our cash register, then baby clothes and girls' sweaters and things and pedal pushers. Then there was a rack of women's clothing and a rack of children's clothing. Then in the back there was things like Pyrex dishes, hardware, and boots and kids' shoes, just like the shoes I have on, kids' shoes. Yarns, pillowcases, sheets, everything you needed was right here. My parents had this store from 1940. Yeah. Yes, I was a Johnson.
I'm Ruth Domet. I'm married to Steve Domet, who is Maxine and George Domet.
Yes, I certainly knew Maxine and George. Do they still live here, or they're not alive any longer? Yeah. So you own this shop?
This is,
I saw
Janet
that.
Kerstetter.
Was that Bob's daughter?
Yeah, she just died. And
I saw that.
She bought this building for the artists of the area and gave it to us as so we could make a gallery for ourselves, and so she will take care. Her trust will take care of it for 10 years, and if we don't make it by then everything goes to the library. So she was just a wonderful person.
Wow, so she was committed to this
Yeah,
town
she
too.
was. Yeah, she came back.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So what was your maiden name?
Dura. I was from
Oh,
Skamaka.
from Skamaka,
Yeah,
sure.
George
Yeah,
and
Jimmy
June.
Dura was.
Well, Jimmy's my uncle. George.
Okay.
George and June were my mom and dad.
Okay, yes, yeah, and they were loggers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, should remember that name and them, yeah.
But I could open it. I mean, it's going to open at noon, but I could open it if you'd like to.
I'd love to.
Sure.
I'd love to. I spent,
A lot of time in here.
Oh.
Yeah.
this was where I grew up.
Yeah. I'm glad I could see.
Glad you saw that,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was a decorator shop the last time I was here. These windows,
They
I
were buried.
believe they were covered
They
when
were
we had
buried.
our store.
Yeah. And-
This might have been. I'm not sure if this was a window or
'cause,
not. But these walls, these are the same walls that were there, the same wood. Same thing here, yeah, sure. So you'd walk in the door and there'd be a big counter here. And then you could walk around the counter, and on this side were there was glassware, and then there was sewing things here. I remember the big spools of thread and boxes of nylons. That was real important during the war. You had to sign up to get a pair of nylons. And then here was menswear, like and men's socks, men's hats, men's whatever. I don't remember this wall being here because, well, when my parents different board, so this has been added. So when my parents first bought the store, they only owned up to right about here, and this back part was where they lived. It was an apartment. And then my grandfather came. Are they having a meeting? My grandfather came, and this was the storeroom. My grandfather came, and he built a big storeroom in the back. When we first moved here, about a year after they'd had the store, there was a fire. And I was the one that discovered the fire. It was in the back by the storeroom outside, and it pretty much burned down this whole back area. Didn't burn the front area.
You owned that part when it started?
Yeah. It wasn't the full, that's when my grandfather came and built a bigger warehouse after that fire. 1941, I believe. I would have been about 6. And, but they had to start all over again because the smoke damaged everything. So it was like, are we going to make it?
Yeah.
Then they did. They did.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, I sure do.
How'd they fight the fire?
They had a fire truck. The fire station was over on that corner up there, and the fire truck came and they fought it. Yeah, they did a good job. But anyway, this was my life. This was where we did household goods, and then back on this wall was kid shoes, boots, hardware items. There was an aisle down here.
I thought you lived here.
After they rebuilt the store, this was what I remember most was this new expansion. There were some stairs. They've changed it here.
There's stairs here.
It's been, my parents sold their business. My mother sold the store after my father died in 1958.
Oh, okay.
We had it from 40 to 58.
Grammy, what was down here?
This was the warehouse. This was where we stored things. But this was what my yeah, you can come down. Yep, yep. No food. Oh, candy. We sold candy. Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Were there other stores?
What did I do? I marked cards. Well, they came with little paper clips, and my brother and I got paid by the card, the way they came packaged. And then my dad would keep us working with marking merchandise. During the Second World War, there was a price stabilization. You could not change your price. So you had to write. We had a little rubber stamp, and we had what were called pin tickets. And they were little paper tickets with pins sticking out the back. And that's what you'd put on your merchandise, like you'd put a pin ticket. So you had to get this little rubber stamp and stamp OPS on it, Office of Price Stabilization. And that meant that you had met the rules of not, during the Second World War, you couldn't, inflation would have eaten us alive. And so they required all of the merchants to keep their prices at one level so that inflation wouldn't destroy the economy. So for 5 years, people had to keep their prices.
Dad?
Yep.
What kind of stuff did your dad do when he was in here? I mean, was he at the cash register?
Occasionally, but he mostly did the orderings and the books and managing. Of course, he sold a lot of things. My mom was kind of responsible for the purchasing of things, but also the upkeep of merchandise. Every night, this is interesting, every night we would cover all of the dry goods with linen cloths to keep the oil heater from laying soot on the clothes. And so covering up the dry goods was a part of my job. 40 to 58. Yeah. Seemed like forever, you know, but it was my forever. No, I graduated in 53 and went to college. And basically, we got married in 58, and so that was when I kind of moved away. And my mom sold the store. My dad died in 58. And so my mom sold the store and went back to... Somebody else? She sold it to Ostranders. And they didn't keep it very long. It didn't fit, really. And then they sold it to Bacon's.
And the Bacon's...
The reason that dime stores kind of went out of business in a lot of ways is, especially an independent one, is because the bigger stores were coming in, and I'm sure Domitz knows all about this, and you couldn't get anyone to sell you small amounts of merchandise. That we would take a dozen shirts where, you know, Kmart would take 75 dozen of the same shirt. So you just couldn't get people to sell them. But the way we bought merchandise is we would have salesmen come in with their sample cases and sell to my dad. That was a lot of the stuff he did. And they'd stay in the hotel if they were staying overnight. I can remember one was Gus and one was Wally, because they'd come and have dinner with us. Also, my parents would go to Portland and go on buying trips, and there they would go to hotels where they'd have sample rooms. And a salesman would set up this room with tables of all the merchandise he was responsible for selling, and then all the stores would come in and buy their merchandise that way. So they would go to Portland for buying trips. I think this was a real good outlet for Gran.
Okay, because she got to meet the people of the
Yeah,
town.
yeah, she liked working.
What was her name?
Mary Johnson. Hmm.
And did your dad like the job?
He loved it. He loved being able to walk across the street and get his mail. He loved having control over his own work. Yeah, he loved living here. And we kids loved, my brother and I loved living here. We felt like we had a pretty idyllic childhood.
He's not alive now. Frank Jacobson is gone. And
Is Florence Tover still? There was a sidewalk or a little path that went along here. So the actual store, I think, went back to right about here where this board is, the interior of the store. Then this was warehouse. And there was steps that came out here, and my dad planted tomatoes along here. And he loved to go outside. His office was right here, and he'd go outside and pick tomatoes for his lunch. No. And this is the same building. This was called Jim's. It had apartments up above. It was a saloon on one side and a restaurant on the other. That's where we did our banking. This was a saloon here called the Spar Tavern, the one that says for rent. And right next to it was another little clothing store at one time where it says Made in Wahkiakum store. That's where that was a barbershop, and that's where I got my hair cut. The Columbia Eagle was a restaurant called Bozeman's Cafe, and I'd go there after a movie and order a plate of potato salad. And this was, at one time, was another building that burned down, and it was a bar with had a soda fountain that you could, if you were a kid under 21, you could sit at the soda fountain, but there was a plywood board that you could not go around. So I'd come here and get 7-Ups during my break. And they sold magazines. And one time my friend Mary and I came here and started looking at magazines that were called Camera. Well, those were illicit pictures.
People in bathing suits?
Not quite.
Oh. I don't know if they
And
Like planes.
so we were standing in the corner inside reading them, and the owner called my dad and told me what I was doing, told him what I was doing. I got him. And that's the Pioneer Church where I went to Sunday school. Over here was another building that was a sporting goods hardware store.
There's a funeral home.
That's
The dock.
that's the funeral home where my dad's they handled my dad's arrangements and everybody else.
Same was there.
At the store, I'd have to go to the store after school every day because that was where I went. But when it was time for me to go home, I'd walk up. This was my walk home. So you're getting to experience my walk home.
3 houses.
We lived in 3 houses. Yep. And I stood on the steps of this building here and watched them fight the fire. Hear me?
So are
Yeah.
we only going to one of the 3 houses?
Oh, it won't take long to do all 3. And so this was my church.
Sunday school?
We went to Sunday school. My parents didn't go to church.
Oh, really?
They had had a bad experience.
In Bend.
Bend.
Yeah.
So I'm walking up this hill thinking, when I wanted a horse, Ella, walking up this hill thinking, when I get to the top of this hill, I bet my dad will have a horse in my front yard. I can remember thinking that's never happened. Yeah, I had to save my money. Okay, I'm going to show you what we would do. Can you hold that? See if I can make it work. These were supposed to shoot off, and we'd shoot these off. And I'd do that on my way up the hill. And there you go, and then just pull it. Pull. Oh, there you got it to go.
That wasn't.
Sorry, honey. What? Let me see your car. Ooh, boy. When I lived in that house, it was white, and we only lived on the first floor and the basement because it was during the Great Second World War, and houses were hard to find. So there was a stairway going up the outside of the house, a covered stairway, and another family lived upstairs, Mrs. Ogendahl, and her husband went to war.
Her husband.
So she lived there by herself. Then after he came home, in fact, I remember the day he came home from the war, he ran up those stairs into his wife's arms, which was wonderful. Then after he came back, they got their own house, and we moved on to all the floors. And my parents' bedroom were the 4 windows in front. Hal's bedroom was in the side window off facing the river.
You were in the basement?
No, I was in another window on the other side. And Hal's bedroom was actually a kitchen because that was her kitchen. And it was actually had a sink and cabinets.
You guys didn't pull it up?
No, we didn't own it. We were renting it.
Oh.
You could, and then the important part of this story, Ella, this is the field where I would keep my horse. There wasn't a house there. Where this little lot right here. And this is where my horse would graze. Yeah.
What's her name?
Trixie. And I would come home at lunch when I was in school. I was probably 13 when I got her. My job was to come home at lunch and fill her water bucket. And one noon I came home and filled her water bucket, and she started acting just crazy. And that was immediately after that we had an earthquake. 1949.
Wow, she felt it.
She felt it, yeah. Janet Dahl was my friend who lived in this greenhouse. They fixed these up nicely. This was the Carlson's house. This was Mrs. Haslam's house. And Mrs. Haslam had a cherry tree. It's still there. There it is. See that tree right there? That's Mrs. Haslam's, but it was huge. And us kids would play in her yard and pick her cherries. And my horse would occasionally, if I had her staked close to her house, my horse would go against the house and rub against her house, and her whole house would shake.
Why
Yeah.
do they all have signs?
Well, that's because they're historic signs.
People live in there.
Yeah.
Why?
And it had a beautiful window in the front door that was etched in different colors. I shot the arrow through the window.
Did you break the edge?
Oh yes, I broke the window.
But you got
I told my dad I was really aiming that way and the arrow turned.
He didn't buy it.
No, I had to, they had to buy a new glass door.
Oh, Grammy.
And we saw, the bridge is right down there. So we saw a plane fly under the bridge, an army plane fly under the bridge.
But it was a
Store.
You graduated in 53.
3.
I graduated 54.
Oh, did you really?
Artist Peters?
Oh, Artist Peterson. Yes, I'll be darned. So do you own this house?
Yeah, I do now.
Oh, do you
We
really?
were just trying to sell it. Yeah, we
Oh.
bought it for a summer place.
Oh,
My
did you?
husband, I thought.
Well, I was just telling the kids about my bedroom was up there.
Okay.
And then we bought a house.
Yeah, but I thought you lived over there.
We did.
Okay.
We did. That
You started
when I
there.
yeah, I lived here for about 7 years.
Tree down.
When I was growing up, this wasn't all blackberries. This was terraced. And Mr. Berglund, who lived in this house, he owned this house and he kept all of this yard up. And that's the sun porch where I first had, my brother and I, Hal and I, had our bedrooms on the sun porch. And that's the roof that we used to climb out of our windows onto the sun porch roof. So let's see. Oh, okay. So right here, between the brown house and this hedge, was another vacant lot. And there's Mrs. Haslam's house. Do you see those new shingles there? That was another place that I'd stake Trixie out, was right here. Oh, and I'll show you where the barn was.
Did people mind?
No, because they mowed the grass down.
Okay.
And let's see, right here in this house with the green trim is where Mary lived. And there wasn't a street here.
So it was you
Me,
and
Gail, Mary.
and Mary.
And this one we bought.
I like that one.
Yeah,
Cute.
and that was my bedroom. See the window upstairs? That was my bedroom, and my cat Pokey would come down that steep roof and scratch on my window to get in at night. My dad wouldn't buy a house till he could pay cash for it.
How much did it cost? Old. Any idea?
I think it was around $10,000.
Buy a car now.
This is the Orth house, and this is a famous old house. Mr. Ingram, Cap Ingram, moved to Cathlamette after he was a clipper ship captain
I like
that
the
sailed
colors of
around
that house.
the Horn of South Africa, and he came here and settled. And his daughter Janet became a friend of my mom's, and when Mom sold the store, she lived in that house for a year. 45. So let's say from 1920 to 1945, a boat would start here every morning at 7:30, and it was a mail boat that also carried passengers and packages, and it stopped at all these little towns along the Columbia River to Astoria. And the reason that it did that is it carried the mail and packages and passengers because these were towns that had no roads to them.
Like you guys did.
We had a road here, Skamakawe had a road, and it stopped at Skamakawe, then it stopped at Altoona, Deep River, Brookings.
River?
They only had river access. So that boat was called the Imperial, and they were friends of ours, Ernie and Harry Foster. Two brothers ran the Imperial, And it would go down in the morning and back in the afternoon, and it always got back here at 4 o'clock and left
Where had it gone? Where,
to Astoria.
ticking?
During the Second World War, when gas was very short, I would get on this boat with my mother and go to Astoria to shop or to see a dentist. And we had a dog named Queenie that didn't behave very well. So Harry said, I know a farmer in Astoria that'll take Queenie. So one morning we walked Queenie down to the dock, and off she went to the farmer in Astoria. This was Johnny's dock. At the top of this building, when I was a kid, was a roller skating rink.
Oh, wow.
And then the tavern was underneath. Well, this building, down this way, did I show you Mrs. Warren's house next to Mrs. Haslam's house?
Yeah.
Well, Warren Cannery was just on the other side of this building, and it's all
It was a cannery.
ramshackle. Yeah,
What were they canning?
salmon, I'm sure, yeah. But those are fishing, well, obviously that fishing boat doesn't go very far. They used to then on their docks, they'd have a big pier and they'd put their nets out to dry on this pier. They'd have racks to hang the nets on and to mend their nets. Oh, I have to tell you, kids, when Mary Hannigan and I were girls, we would come down here with our fishing poles and we'd fish off this dock, just like these kids are sitting. And we'd fish off this dock and we'd catch catfish. Tens of catfish. And then we'd have fights with our catfish.
What do you mean by that?
1, 2, 3.
There's nothing particularly remarkable other than this park had huge trees.
Like huge cedar trees?
Huge trees is what I remember, like that tree over there. And there weren't any houses over there at all. It was all like that woods. And in this park were 2 cabins, old cabins, that we would come and play in. And then I would walk from my home through this wooded park to where my horse was. And it was always a relief to me to take her to the field up there, because when she was here in town, then every noon I had to water her and then take her from there to the barn. And the barn isn't there, but I'll explain where it is. It was as we leave town.
So it's more work.
And so I'd have to take her into the barn, feed her hay, and clean out the manure, and go get her in the morning before I'd go to school and stake her out in the grass again. So it was a big job. We would walk through these woods, and all of this was woods. All of that was woods. It looked like that, all as far as your eye could see. And there was a little stream at the bottom of one of the little ravines in here. And as little kids, we'd come and play in that stream with our folks. And that was our little fairyland.
Trixie?
No, I had a friend named Don Coates, who was George Hannigan's age. He had horses, his folks did, and he and I would go horseback riding up on the hill above the marina called Cemetery Hill. We'd go up there. We also would peel chinham bark. I don't know if you know what that is, but it was a tree. I don't know what the real name of the tree is, but you could peel chinham bark and take the peel off and sell it. So we'd go take our gunny sacks on our horses, go into the woods, peel chinham bark, load up our sacks, and take them down and sell them. To who? There was a buyer in the summertime that would come and buy, and it was used for medicine of some kind. So this was a park, and our grade schools always had a last day of school picnic here. And it had no apparatus, maybe swings, but that would have been it. And the mule that we kept was just on the other side of this house in a field. I was a cheerleader, and one of my jobs was to keep track of the mule.
Really?
The mule, because our school name was Waukee High for Wakayakum High, the mule was named Hiwaukee. And one time Mary and I were cheerleaders for 6 months, and our job was to go get the mule for a pep rally. So we got the mule out of the field and the mule ran away.
Oh, no.
And we chased her through the town. It was in the winter, and I was home, and Hal was in Maine in the Air Force. And Mom and I more or less took the store. I helped in the store, and we more or less did the store together. And that was a wonderful time of bonding with my mom. I am grateful for that time because she and I really connected on a whole nother level. I went to get married to Dad, and that's when she sold the store. She and I went to Portland, and it was some real estate company in Portland that sold businesses. And we talked to them and found out, well, how you'd go about selling a store. And I can remember driving with her one noontime out to the Locoman River, where there was a bridge across the river, and she and I just talked about how much we should ask for the store, and we came to sort of an agreement. Not that we were not agreeing, but we just kind of talked it out, sorted it out. So that was a hard time, but it was really a time I just grew very close to my mom, more than I had ever been. No, I was just finished college, 1958. That December, yeah. Anyway. It's kind of a neat memory. I think this is the pad that the high school was on, here. So you've seen pictures of what the building looked like. It was a 2-story building, wooden building with a stone basement. The upstairs was the high school, 6 rooms. The downstairs was the grade school, 5 rooms. And the basement was bathrooms, FFA, and home economics. It was right here. And then that was the football field there. And then the gym was where the buses are. There was a big gym building. To me it was big. You know, nowadays it wouldn't be that big. And my tennis court, I played tennis, and there was one, maybe that's where the tennis court was. I bet you it is. There was one tennis court. I'm sure that was the tennis court. I'm sure this was the tennis court, now that I look at this. So the high school was here, and the tennis court was right here. I'm sure of that. And there was one tennis court, and the way I got good at tennis was, if you wanted to play, you had to play at lunchtime with high school kids. And so if you lost, back and sat on the steps and waited your turn to play again. So you just played, and so as about a 10-year-old, I started playing against the high school kids or whoever else was there at lunchtime to play tennis. And to keep playing, you had to win. So they just, and then after school, the tennis teams would practice, the boys. And I'd come up after school sometimes and sit and just listen to them practice. And I learned how to serve and how to play tennis by just watching and playing. And tennis was really my favorite sport to play.